The story is new at noon. Former Governor Matt Bevin is making another move to try and remove the judge who held him in contempt of court. Judge Angela Johnson sentenced Bevin to 60 days in jail or a $500 fine. The case centers on Bevin's refusal to turn over financial records in an ongoing legal dispute with his adopted son Jonah. Jonah Bevin and his 3 siblings were adopted from Ethiopia in 2012. Court filings show he was later sent to facilities in Florida and in 2023 to another in Jamaica. Jonah says he was abused there. His attorney says he's unable to support himself. The filing says Bevin doesn't think the judge can give him an impartial or fair trial. He previously tried to have her removed before the contempt sentencing. The judge said that first motion was not filed properly, even though the circuit clerk accepted it.